All right, joining us now, the Green Party candidate for president, Dr. Jill Stein. 9-second applause.
Great to be with you. Thanks so much, Justin.
Thank you for being here. Thank you for being here. So I just want to, my audience is a very diverse audience. And more than anything else, there's a perception that the Green Party is most effective at being a spoiler party. You're currently polling around 1% nationally, 2% in some crucial swing states. What does success look like for your campaign?
So 1 out of every 3 eligible voters, did not vote in the last presidential race. These voters tend to be young, lower income, and of color. Don't they count? Over 60% of the American people are saying they want other choices. Most people are voting against the candidate they hate the most instead of for the candidate that actually represents what people need. And let me say the conversation is extremely limited and censored in the mainstream media, which most people feel like doesn't represent them and is actually not telling the truth. They lock us out and shut us out. So democracy has to start with a real conversation, with a set of choices, and with informed voters. And voters are not happy with our lives. Our lives are in crisis. So you could say at the most basic level, our goal is to actually have a real process, small d democracy, that meets voters' demand for other choices and for solutions to the crises that we're facing in virtually every dimension of our lives. We're spending, or I should say, our elected misleaders are spending over half of our congressional budget on the endless war machine. We just sent practically $9 billion to Israel to expand its genocidal war on Muslims. At the same time, the FEMA is about $9 billion short of enabling, the citizens, the victims of these back-to-back hurricanes, enabling relief for families and businesses and communities to recover. So things are not working out so well for us. Aren't voters entitled? So, my goal, our goal as a Green Party is we're a people-powered party. So our goal is to fill the gap, to fill the void in political empowerment and solutions that put them on the table, the solutions that everyday people are clamoring for. We believe voters have a right. Voters are demanding those other solutions, and we are providing them. If the Democrats don't like this notion that the vote could be split, which it is not, all evidence suggests we are bringing people out of the non-voting bloc. We give people a reason to come out and vote, and we know this from detailed polls. That's where most of our votes come from. It's propaganda that's intended to keep you in line and to give you marching orders to vote for more of the same. It's this massive fear campaign that's being conducted that says we're spoilers. If the Democrats really worried about spoiling elections, they can fix it in the blink of an eye with an election reform called ranked choice voting. It's already been adopted by about 27 cities around the country. The state of Maine uses it. Washington State has it on the ballot this time. It lets you rank your choices. And if your first choice is an underdog and you're worried they might lose, you just rank your safety, your lesser evil, whoever you think that is, as your second choice. And if your first choice loses in this system, your vote is automatically reassigned to your second choice. So it's a win-win. The Democrats adopt it in their own primaries, like in New York State, in New York City, actually. They'll use it because it's a great voting system, but they'll fight it in the primaries because they want to be able to use fear. They want to extort your vote. They want to basically give you marching orders and make you terrified of the other guy instead of saying what they're going to do for you. And, that's the problem with the whole system. So our campaign is intended to address all of that, but especially put real solutions on the table that the American people are desperate for right now.
I mean, from a policy platform standpoint, most of the Green parties, if not all the Green parties' touch points on their agenda are very popular. You guys are an anti-war, anti-genocide, pro-worker, Green New Deal. You're talking about challenging empire, legalizing marijuana day one, $25 minimum wage. Why, between elections, because I think most people interact with the Green Party during presidential elections. Can you give a description of what the Green Party does to further their agenda so that, it feels like a viable movement?
So we're part of a social movement as well as an electoral movement. And the press, one of the many smears they run against us is that we supposedly go away in between presidential races, which is not true at all. What goes away is the mainstream media. So we're we are disappeared, we're canceled. Even during races, too. It's very hard for us to get coverage even during races. And by the way, we are forced to run at the presidential level if we want to maintain our ballot status. And why is that? That's because of the rules that the Democrats and Republicans have created. They have these ridiculous ballot access laws that are designed to silence competition and to make sure that nobody else gets on the ballot. But that's how democracy is supposed to work. You're supposed to have choices. If you don't have choices, it's not a democracy. So, we don't go away. We're here doing the work. We have about 150 people serving as city councilors, as mayors, as school committee, development, rent control boards, et cetera. We're here doing the work. We've had a couple people elected to state representative, but the system fights us tooth and nail. You've heard of COINTELPRO. You know what was done to the Black Panthers, presumably. This continues. We know that because the Democrats advertise right now for paid positions to manage infiltrators and spies. So they have all kinds of ways. We're a small d democratic, decentralized, participatory party. We don't give marching orders from on high. We're not bought and paid for. We don't accept the big money. We don't use super PACs or PACs or these other loopholes for legalized corruption. So we don't have any, discipline coming on high. We're a bottom-up grassroots party. So it's rather easy to infiltrate and disrupt us. So the Democrats are doing that big time, and they have ways to basically throw us off the ballot. They hired an army of lawyers in this election in order to throw us off the ballot, basically using lawfare based on trivia, and often it's based on made up stuff. So they've challenged us to throw us off the ballot in many states, and we have prevailed so far in all but one. So, they're using dirty tricks. And we are here doing the work. Not only that we are running for lower office, and we've had about 1,500 candidates elected to lower office. They tend to be reelected at high rates. They're doing great and innovative stuff across the board, which is not covered because the Democrats and the Republicans, but especially the Democrats, because they talk the talk, they just don't walk the walk. We're doing both. So they don't want word leaking out about what we're doing. But, we're fighting, we're leading the charge for healthcare as a human right for everyone, for a universal basic income above poverty, for rent control. We want rent control to be federalized and nationalized, for community police control boards. So it's our communities controlling the police instead of the other way around. We want to end the death penalty, which is used, vastly disproportionately against people of color. We want to put an end to the use of prison labor, which is basically slavery that still exists. We want to end the cash bail system. We're there doing the work and fighting the fight. And the Democrats pull out all the stops to smear us, not based on policy, but based on, basically ridiculous and made up stuff. And, this notion that I'm a vote for me is a vote for Trump is absolutely nonsense. We are the alternative to genocide, whether it's Trump's genocide or Biden's genocide, and we urge people to stand up and vote for what it is that we want, because otherwise the voter power gets buried. If you're voting for the lesser evil, there is no trace, there is no record that we demand, a living wage of $25 an hour. Just for that to be on record asserts a power of its own. And let me say, if we get to 5%, then we get public funding, and we also have ballot access automatically in many states. It depends on the particulars of the state as to what percent they require, but we will make that ballot access in many states if our overall percentage is 5%. So, we begin to build. You're not going to challenge City Hall overnight. You have to build this. And this is my third run. And believe me, we are so far ahead of where we were in my first run in 2012. This stuff builds, and now we are widely recognized as the party for peace, the party for reparations, the party to cancel student debt and make public higher education, the party for healthcare as a human right. In fact, we have put all of these planks to the platform on the record. These did not exist as national issues until they were introduced by Greens in presidential races. So the Democrats are quaking in their boots, that we should be heard, that we start climbing our way up. And they create all kinds of smears. Every election is the most, critical election of our lives. And whoever the Republican is the most dangerous person ever. Well, remember, at one time that was Dick Cheney and George Bush. And now, Dick Cheney is one of the, prized endorsers of the Kamala Harris campaign. So this is a big PR job going on, and we have to stand up. The whole notion that our reproductive rights, for women, the right to an abortion, is on the line. Yeah, it's on the line because the Democrats haven't stood up to defend it. They haven't codified Roe when they could have. But they could solve the abortion crisis right now by building abortion clinics in states that don't have them on federal land, on military bases, or other federal land. That problem could be solved right now. So the Democrats are forever in the business of creating some crisis that can only be so-called solved by eliminating competition, by basically undermining democracy, by exercising authoritarian control over who your choices are. No, that's absolutely not true. And they can stop fighting against ranked choice voting, which is being passed all over the country to eliminate the spoiler potential entirely, once and for all.
I've noticed in a lot of your interviews and conversations, the framing tends to be in reaction to the Democratic Party or lawfare used by the Democratic Party. At what point does that seem to reinforce the notion that you guys are the party to spoil the blue team?
What it seems to be doing is reinforcing the notion that the Democratic Party is a scam. And if you look at the reactions that are going on, take a look at the Breakfast Club, for example, where we were set up for an ambush by, Angela Ray, who thought she was coming up with really original research, so she said, and kind of, throwing the same old mud at us that we've been dealing with for years. So, that was just a joke, and we knew very much how to speak when we had a chance to get a word in edgewise from these, predatory attack dogs that try to basically shut us down. Same thing with the Mehdi Hassan interview, many of them. And the result is very similar. If you just read the comments, you'll see lots of people saying, I was not going to vote in this election because I don't buy the line that either party is feeding us. And I don't buy either of the candidates being rammed down our throats, these zombies. And people say, okay, now I've learned that there actually is a candidate that's standing up for us. I'm going to come out and vote, and I'm going to register for the first time. So that's the impact that it's having. And we say, keep bringing it on. I mean, just today, there was another smear campaign on by some of the guests that were on the Hill Rising. And just take a look at the comments. It's the same thing. It's like wall to wall support for our campaign. And we say, bring it on, keep it happening, because the smears that are being thrown against us are ridiculous. They are obvious, propaganda, and it's old news. There's nothing new here. It's ridiculous stuff, and people see right through it. And people are saying, on account of this attack interview, I will now be voting for Jill Stein and Butch Ware. I was on the fence up until now, but you have convinced me that the Democratic Party is just pure abusive garbage. Thank you. I'm out of here. And we say, keep it up, please. Throw us into the briar patch. It's working very well for us.
You recently picked up an endorsement from Abandon Harris. That made a number of headlines. They cited, "We are not choosing between a greater evil and a lesser evil. We are confronting two destructive forces, one currently overseeing a genocide and another equally committed to continuing it." With that kind of landscape between the red team and the blue team, chances are one of those parties will win this presidential election. What are the ramifications for for people who are anti-genocide or the Muslim community in America, should the red team win? Do you see a distinction between how either party might handle the conflict in the Middle East, or is it all the same?
Well, they don't, and they're in a position, to have a lot of experience here. And they're also in a position to know what the consequences of U.S. foreign policy and economic policy are. And, and by economic, I mean really in terms of our global economic domination, and our track record for overthrowing democratically elected governments in order to basically lock in U.S. hegemony on the global economy and on military power. And, as Muslim Americans and Arab Americans, they've had a front row seat on U.S. foreign policy, and they know how devastating it is. In this country, they also know what it means to be targeted, to have our civil liberties and our civil rights targeted. And remember, it's not just the Republicans, it's the Democrats who are also leading the charge here on the assault on our civil liberties, especially freedom of speech and freedom to protest and academic freedom. It's very much Democrats who are leading the charge with cop cities under Democratic city councils in Atlanta, where you have these very oppressive police training centers, which are also taking precious open space away from the African-American community in particular. The community is up in arms about this, and the Democratic City Council won't even allow them to have a referendum on it. That's a big fight as to whether they were going to even get a referendum to try to shut this down. So, the Democrats are not standing up for our civil liberties here either. And, we've had under Barack Obama, as under his predecessors and under Trump and under Biden, we have a real assault on our civil liberties and, the freedom from warrantless spying and so on. So we're in very difficult conditions right now. The Arab American community is in a real position to know what that's like here at home and abroad. And their feeling is that we need to stand up and fix this. And they have insight here, not just for the moment, but for the long haul. And that to me is what is really important and critical, that we are building a powerful coalition now that's much bigger than it's ever been before to stand up for not only for our civil liberties here at home, and the fact that it's the IDF, it's the Israeli Defense Forces, which are training a lot of our local police now in these incredibly abusive and horrific tactics. And under both Democrats and Republicans, we're recycling military equipment and bringing it into our local communities, we have the prison industrial complex, which really took off under Bill Clinton with the support of Joe Biden, and Kamala Harris herself, has a track record for locking up African Americans, for extending jail sentences in order to keep prison labor cheap and available, for denying evidence for prisoners on death row, exculpatory evidence that would get them to their freedom. She sat on that, sat on reforms against cash bail, sat on a lawsuit against Steve Mnuchin for his role in the housing crisis. So we have some very bad options which are on the table right now on the part of both parties. So the Muslim community has stood up here with the real courage of their convictions to say, like so many others of us are saying, that that we need to stand up and fight for the greater good. Forget the lesser evil. We don't have a lesser evil option. Our job has to be building the greater good and building a coalition to make that happen. And step one, as Frederick Douglass said, power concedes nothing without a demand. If we are not standing up and making that demand, you disappear that demand if you're just voting for the lesser evil. There is no evidence that there is support for reparations, that there is support to stop this genocide, that there are political consequences for opposing the world and opposing the American people, for opposing national sentiment here in this country. There are consequences to that. And if you're just voting for the lesser evil, there is no evidence of that whatsoever. So like Muslim Americans, like the group of 130 imams that also signed on to supporting a third party in this race and opposing genocide, there are many people who get that our current political system is throwing us under the bus, especially vulnerable communities, and that includes the African American community. Together, we are being thrown under the bus by a politics that is bought and paid for by Wall Street and the war machine. It is not coming back. And like Frederick Douglass said, power concedes nothing without a demand. We have to stand up and build that demand, which we can do because the numbers are on our side. It is the majority of American people now, over 60%, who are calling for another political party that actually serves the public interest instead of the ones that we have that are basically bought and paid for by the deepest pockets out there. And that is not helping us. We are not making slow progress. We're actually backsliding in a very big way to look at homelessness, to look at the skyrocketing of housing prices, the evictions, child poverty tripled in the last 2 years, while the wealth of the billionaires doubled. So, it's not working for us. The system is not working. We need to be able to stand up to stop taking marching orders, stop being good little boys and girls for the bosses in the political elites who are trying to tell us to keep voting for them. Just don't look up, and don't look around. Don't look at what's actually happening to us. Just keep taking those marching orders. We, like the Muslim community and many in the African American community, if you take a look at the Breakfast Club response, there are many in the Black community who do not feel well served and who were not going to vote whatsoever.
Were you surprised by the reaction? Were you surprised by the reaction to that conversation? My audience loved it, by the way. And, you referenced the online reaction. It was similar in my coverage of that too. But were you surprised by how many people seemed to gravitate towards that conversation?
I'll tell you why I'm surprised. And that is because our agenda hasn't changed. We've kind of been a voice for a actual living wage, which now is a $25 an hour living wage, for rent control, for healthcare as a human right for everyone, which is free at the point of service, paid for through a very steeply progressive tax, which would fall on the wealthy, cost massively reduced for everybody else, and everybody gets healthcare as a human right. So you don't have to stick with an abusive job because it's the only way you can get health insurance, or just not have any health insurance that you can afford, which is the condition for, so many tens of millions of Americans. To be locked into student debt if you were lucky enough to go to a technical school or get higher education. We've had basically the same agenda. And what's changed, we've called for cutting the military budget and putting our dollars into real security here at home. And that includes reparations for, a debt unpaid. So we have been on this for, the last, my first run was in 2012. Our agenda has not fundamentally changed, but what's changed is the conditions around us, that our analysis and our solutions have been proven very on target. And times have changed and people are really ready for this now. And the Breakfast Club was really our first big exposure to the African American community. We have seen support in the Arab American community, and we suspected it was there because there are a lot of people in the African American community who've become very involved in the campaign and who are really major proponents for it. but we hadn't seen it, broadly on mass media. So that was the first time that we saw it. And then it just continued. It hasn't stopped and it continues to build. Even this smear ad, which is such a joke that the Democrats just put out on social media. The last time I checked on Twitter, it had like 13,000 likes, which is nothing for something that they put a lot of money into. It's nothing at all. And the comments are all just tearing it to shreds. So people have kind of had it with a political system that's been throwing them under the bus, certainly since the Clinton era and NAFTA and the offshoring of our jobs. And then under Obama, when he and the Democratic Congress chose to bail out Wall Street rather than homeowners. And that was especially devastating, to the African-American community that really lost its cumulative wealth, such as it was. And, that community was absolutely devastated economically and has taken a really long time for it to crawl back. And low-income people in general are in very dire straits now. It's not getting better. It's actually getting worse. In spite of all the propaganda, it's not improving. So people are really ready for a change. And it was just so great to see that on the Breakfast Club. And then it's really been hit after hit ever since then, including today on Hill Rising. There were a couple of Democratic Party DNC shills that were just like raking me over the coals with all this, just nothing new here. All these like done arguments that failed a long time ago, and they're getting roasted on, in their comments as well. So it's really great for us every time we get one of these smears, and it just brings more attention to this choice that the American people didn't know that they had. So I would say, don't prejudge the election. We could be in World War III tomorrow, literally. Israel is now announced that it will soon be attacking Iran shortly, and the U.S. now has 100 troops on the ground to help in Israel's defense with this new missile defense system. And, we have two aircraft carrier groups, each of which contains 5,000 service men and women that are in the zone of conflict right now. So very big guns are preparing to fire. We could be in World War III or a massively enlarging regional war very soon, which is extremely dangerous for us, not to mention that this endless war machine is also impoverishing us and making it impossible for us to meet our needs here at home. So I would not prejudge the outcome of this election yet. It's not over. And the American people may be increasingly interested to know that they have a choice that actually represents their needs.
You actually, during your response to the first debate between Trump and Biden, you actually made reference to the fact that Israel had aspirations to expand into war with Lebanon and Hezbollah. And since then, we have seen that actual thing happen. But there was also a very viral clip of you willing to call Netanyahu a war criminal, but your reluctance to do so when it comes to Vladimir Putin. Why the reluctance to do so? I in my mind, it's kind of the opposite of Trump to me. Like, it's kind of like, Trump would show support for, he would have a relationship with Kim Jong-un, let's say. But, when pushed on it, you still had a reluctance. And, where'd that reluctance come from? And what do you see as different between what's happening in Ukraine and what's happening in Israel?
Yeah. Well, first, let me say, I hesitate to use the word war criminal because, let me say, our country is highly culpable on that score. And, in the words of Martin Luther King, my country is the greatest purveyor of violence in the world today. It was true then, it's true now. So whenever you call anybody a war criminal, you kind of need to put it in the context of the U.S. empire, which has overthrown 80 governments just through covert action since the Second World War. We've had a whole series of catastrophic wars based on lies, essentially, that devastate, kill millions of people across the board, and which also devastate our economy as well. So I don't like to use the word war criminal. It makes certain presumptions. But even more importantly, the reason I don't like the word is what John F. Kennedy said, which is that we must not fear to negotiate I'm sorry, let me say that differently. We must not negotiate out of fear, but we must not fear to negotiate. And in this day and age, when we are on the precipice of nuclear war, the last thing we want to do is to use inflammatory language that makes it harder to sit down and negotiate, because that should be our first, first principle of foreign policy right now, is that let's not get into nuclear wars. We're not going to get into a nuclear war with Netanyahu. Also, Netanyahu does not negotiate. He would rather assassinate his potential, the representatives of the other side. He
We
will
can say the same
assassinate.
thing about Putin, right?
Yes and no. He has engaged in negotiations, however, in good faith negotiations. And that includes around Ukraine.
Okay.
He has. And in fact, it was the U.S. that has undermined those negotiations over and over. So, we do have actually the potential to negotiate with Putin. And that's really critical, especially now that we are on the verge of nuclear war with Russia around Ukraine. So it's been the U.S. who's been boycotting the negotiations, and which has disrupted. Actually, remember, under the auspices of Turkey, there was negotiations where actually Russia made real concessions, and there was an agreement. And Ukraine actually made concessions too. And then the U.S. and the U.K. came in and said, nope, no deal. The deal's off. So this war could have been ended immediately after it started. And the U.S., refused to allow that to happen. So according to his track record, according to his plea for negotiations all along, what Russia wanted from Ukraine was neutrality, like Austria following the Second World War. So this could have readily been accomplished, and it is to the shame of the U.S. warmongers that this didn't happen. So that's why I feel like our dialogue with Putin and Ukraine and European countries is absolutely critical, and using inflammatory language is not a good idea here and now. For Netanyahu, he has already demonstrated clearly he will not negotiate. He does everything possible not to negotiate. And besides, we don't need to negotiate with Netanyahu because he is our proxy. He's a U.S. proxy operating with U.S. weapons, U.S. money, U.S. diplomatic cover. We control him. He is on a very short leash. So we don't need to negotiate with him, which he won't do anyhow, but let's pretend he would. We don't even need to negotiate. We can stop this war right now, and we can prevent World War III from breaking out in the Middle East immediately. We can do that. So this is kind of a pragmatic decision on my part. I subscribe to the Jeffrey Sachs view of diplomacy, which is that we really want diplomacy rather than nuclear war, and we are sitting on the brink right now. It's important for people to understand that we cannot have a nuclear war anywhere without all being in the target areas. It doesn't take many nuclear weapons being, detonated for us to go into nuclear winter. When a nuclear bomb goes off, you see this mushroom cloud going up, That mushroom cloud, you should think of it as a conveyor belt. It is moving up debris into the upper atmosphere where it doesn't come down with the rain and the snow and the wind and so on. It stays there. It dims the sunlight all over the world, and we lose food production, and we go into global famine to different degrees, depending on how many weapons get detonated. But this can happen just with, so-called tactical nuclear weapons. It doesn't take that many. A tactical nuke now is what went off in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. This is how casual our criminal misleaders are, who are trying to lull us into nuclear war, because again, they've got big donors that want to spend a lot of money building more nuclear weapons. This is extremely dangerous. And let me say one other thing on that score, which is that a single nuclear armed submarine, and we have like 12 of them, maybe 14, but I think it's 12. A single nuclear armed submarine contains the equivalent of 5,000 Hiroshima bombs. So just consider the destructive power that just And one nuclear sub, we've got 12. Russia has the same number. China has a few. We can't go there. That's many, 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 many orders of magnitude more than what it takes to eliminate all, human life on Earth. We're done. We're over and done with, not just from the blast, but from the nuclear winter. And the nuclear winter affects us everywhere. We hear congressmen and women saying, oh, I don't worry about nuclear war because it'll be over there. Doesn't matter where it is. It's effectively global wherever it is. So we need to be in the business of banning nuclear weapons. There's a global treaty right now, which has been signed by the vast majority of the world's nations. It's only the nuclear powers like us, that are fighting it. We need to get with the program and end nuclear weapons. But in the nuclear age, diplomacy is absolutely critical, and you don't want to undermine that with reckless language.
One thing that really does stand out from your campaign in comparison to the red team and the blue team is your agenda for Black Americans. You've spoken at length so far on your own, unprompted, about reparations, but you also want to include and ensure single-payer healthcare, eliminate food deserts, work with Congress and federal agencies to codify the Justice for Black Farmers Act, eliminate white nationalists from the police force. I think we all want that. Ensure an Office of Civil Rights is fully funded. Restore Section 4B and Section 5 of the 1965 Voting Rights Act and permanently certify the entire law. I mean, these things are amazing. I'm sure everyone in my community would be all for them. But we consistently run into resistance in Congress. How does a Stein-Ware administration make these things happen with such little Green Party representation in Congress?
Okay, really great question. And this has everything to do with the fact that we are not bought and paid for. The president has the ability to be not only the commander-in-chief, but also the organizer-in-chief. So there are things that we can leverage, and there are many things we can do from the White House with executive power. But let's set aside executive power. Let's look at things that require a vote in Congress, because that will be, the bulk of policy making. So one thing that we will do, on day one is bring back town hall meetings. This used to be a thing where elected officials had to face their constituents, their voters. They don't. They're too busy making calls for money. That's who they answer to. They're big donors, not their constituents. So we will basically hold their feet to the fire, and we will name and shame congressmen and women who are not coming out to their town hall meetings. So we will really put pressure on so that people can begin to hold their elected officials accountable. Another thing that we would like to do is to basically help communities engage recall elections, so that if their congressmen and women are not standing up for them on healthcare as a human right for everyone, or reparations for that matter, or a $25 an hour minimum wage, or rent control across the country, we can bring public pressure to bear, both through town hall meetings, but also through congressional hearings. We want to bring back meaningful congressional hearings, like during the Church Commission back in the 1970s. We'd like to hold hearings on the role of the deep state and the CIA in our foreign policy and help get that out. Another thing we can do on day one, actually, is take to court the consolidated corporate mainstream media to break it up, so that once again, we have a diversity of media sources instead of media that basically acts like a lapdog instead of acting like a watchdog. We need the media to be able to tell the story, to, watchdog our elected officials, and to, for everyday voters to be informed and to be able to hold these people accountable. Another thing that we will do is use the FARA, Foreign Agent Registration Act, to contest the influence of, for example, Israel on our foreign policy. There's substantial evidence now. There's a recent investigative report done by Lee Fang, formerly of The Intercept. Now he is on Substack, that actually tracks the flow of money from the Knesset to U.S. nonprofits that then weigh in on policy and change legislation and regulations and so on. All of this, combats our power as everyday people. So these are some of the many sources that we will bring to bear to help lift our voices and enable the American people to actually, achieve real solutions. And probably the first one that we would rally behind is Medicare for All, because it not only fills this horrific gap for healthcare, makes it comprehensive, so it includes mental health care as well as reproductive. It includes your eyeglasses, your dental care, and chronic care. So many have, have elders and even children, who are disabled and who need round-the-clock care. Well, you can get that then through chronic care, through Medicare for All, instead of having to spend yourself into poverty and then, access chronic care through Medicaid, which most people would rather have home care, which can be provided, efficiently and cost effectively. So all kinds of things will get better. Plus, the cost goes way down. Right now, 1 out of every 3 healthcare dollars is actually spent on paper pushing and bureaucracy and red tape. It's not paying for your healthcare. But this is over 30% of the healthcare dollar. So by moving to a Medicare for All, an improved Medicare for All type system, we save 1 out of every $3. That means we can expand healthcare to cover everyone comprehensively, and we still save enough money that we gain back $500 billion a year. So this is motherhood and apple pie. The American people already support it. The only ones who don't, are Congress, because they're being paid by big pharma and the health insurance industry. Oh. So this is the solution to launch, the power of the people and to exercise our power as voters to compel our elected officials through congressional hearings, but especially through town hall meetings, to compel them to actually take a stand that benefits us as voters, and for us to stand up and fight back if they won't.
There's a very interesting statement you made in that Mehdi Hasan interview you referenced earlier. You mentioned that Democrats are the cause of right-wing extremism. And that point came up in the conversation. It really jutted out to me because I don't necessarily look at the red team or the blue team. I look at the South and the Confederates. And so whatever side the South is on has been pretty consistent throughout the history of this country. What do you mean by Democrats are the cause of right-wing extremism?
Okay. So if you look at what drove lots of working people out of the Democratic Party, why they started voting for Trump as a protest, this happened big time in 2010. That's when the electorate really flipped in a big way. So that Democrats lost 1,000 seats in state legislatures, lost 64 seats in Congress and 12 seats in the Senate, and lost 12 governorships. There was a huge sea change. Why? Because the Democrats had just, passed the Wall Street bailouts and thrown out millions of homeowners. And that then came on top of NAFTA, which put millions of workers out of work. And that was largely, under the Democrats and Bill Clinton that happened. So the Democrats are following an agenda that's often called the neoliberal agenda, which is about austerity, privatization, big tax giveaways to the wealthy, and endless war. That's kind of the foundations of the Clinton and post-Clinton Democratic Party. Although they talk the talk, to look at the walk that they walk, it's actually a privatization and austerity agenda and big tax giveaways. Now, the Republicans have their equivalent of that, but the Democrats are doing it as well, and have been at the helm when much of this was brought into effect, especially the Wall Street bailout in 2008 and NAFTA. So there was a big shift that took place because the Democrats make promises and they break promises. So many people started voting for Trump, not because they liked Trump, but because they were very pissed at the Democrats. So you have basically a Democratic agenda, and their broken promises that are driving people to the right. As strictly factual history, that is what happened. And those were the drivers that the Democrats enacting their Wall Street agenda drove a lot of people to the right. And that continues to carry on. You know, the lecture that Barack Obama gave to African-American men the other day for not supporting Kamala Harris is not being well received, you know, and what I'm hearing is that lots of people are moving to the right because they are very tired of being, you know, talked to and manipulated and given false hope and false promises. Let me add one other thing, which is that remember how Trump got his start through the Pied Piper strategy of the Democrats, which was to lift up the most radical right-wing Republican, to lift him up through their friends in the press so that they would have, in theory, the most beatable candidate. Well, it didn't work out that way, but that did give Trump, you know, the momentum to basically emerge out of the morass of candidates and distinguish himself as the Republican. So they basically gave him his start. Now they continue to use that strategy. And in the midterms of 2022, the Democrats spent over $50 million boosting the most radical right-wing Republicans. Many of them emerged victorious from their primaries and launched their careers as radical right-wing Republicans because of Democratic support for, you know, for the right-wing agenda as a, as a political strategy. Now, they were able to beat most of those candidates, unlike Trump, who they couldn't beat, but they were able to beat most of them in the general. But in the meantime, they have launched the political careers and changed the culture of the Republican Party. So this has been a mixed bag that cannot be blamed entirely on Republicans, that the Democrats are generating this as well. At the same time that the Democrats are, you know, embracing these cop cities and the strategy of training local police forces through the Israeli Defense Forces in the most repressive techniques. The Democrats have, you know, led the way on mass incarceration and, you know, and these very oppressive anti-Black pieces of legislation. So that drives a lot of people into the other camp as a protest vote. That is what we mean when we say that the Democrats are driving this right-wing agenda.
I will say this, you know, you have garnered an endorsement from Abandon Harris. This might be the first time I've ever seen the blue team put out an attack ad against a third party. That might be the first time I've seen that, which I did see this week. And, you know, you've given a very sober explanation for Democrats are the cause of right-wing extremism. It really does feel like the Green Party, given just the tone and temperament of how a lot of these discussions are framed, it really does feel like the Green Party is more against the blue team than the red team. Is there any blame or is there any, you know, criticism you have for the red team that is separate from criticism from the blue team?
Absolutely. But let me say, the Democrats are very good at critiquing the red team. The red team cannot critique the Democrats. They say the Democrats are too far to the left. That's their critique, which is entirely, you know, insane. So there is no real critique except for what we put out. You know, in terms of watchdogging the Republicans, the Democrats are on that job, and we don't add a lot to that conversation. But, you know, absolutely, of course, you know, the red team is fascism. Donald Trump is fascism right now. And everything that the Democrats are doing, they pretty much are doing as well. You know, they attack democracy in the transition of power after the election, and they also strip voter rolls, you know, in order to deny the right to vote, you know, while the Democrats do it in advance of the election by suppressing alternatives and throwing candidates off the ballot. The Republicans, absolutely, they give away the store to the wealthy few. But there's not really much of an argument that's disguising that. That's pretty much evident. And people, as I say, are not voting for Trump because they think he's actually serving working people. They're voting for Trump because they are very pissed at the Democrats for making promises and breaking them.
Word up. Dr. Jill Stein, I appreciate you. Is there anything you'd like the audience to know or any other points you want to make before we wrap this conversation?
Yeah, well, let me just say, like to small business owners, and Black businesses in particular, have been just devastated. And, by actions underneath the Democrats, and the Republicans are certainly not fighting for small businesses, although they pretend that they are. They pretend to be the friend of the working person, but they're absolutely not, and under our administration, we will basically reduce the tax burden on working people, on small businesses, and put that tax burden where it belongs, on the billionaires and the and the multimillionaires to pay their fair share and give actual working people and small businesses a fighting chance, because they're not getting their just due now, and not from the subsidies that Democrats would provide as well. We need to get healthcare off the backs of businesses, and we need to ensure that workers actually have a fighting chance. But let me just say, because I hear a knock at my door there, that I really encourage people to go find out more at jillstein2024.com. And you can be a part of this. 1 out of every 3 voters did not vote. Every eligible voter, 1 out of 3 did not vote in 2020. And we urgently need to give them a reason to come out and vote. And if people hear that there is a campaign for reparations, to end police violence, to hold killer cops accountable at the federal level, to put control of police forces into our communities, not the mayor and the good buddies of the police who will just let them off the hook every time, to ensure that we have actual decent and dignified lives and $24 an hour minimum wage, go check us out, because you may find our agenda very much to your liking. And 1 out of every 3 people who are not voting need to know. So we really encourage people to sign up to join our volunteer team, and you can be part of the phone banking, door knocking, tabling, and flyering. We could actually own this election if word got out, especially given that we might be into World War III tomorrow under the Democrats. Likewise, under the Republicans, it would be the same. The American people deserve a fate that's going to work, that we can all survive and thrive in, not World War III, but we could see the vote tip in a big way with the kinds of catastrophes that are waiting right now. We could have another hurricane that actually hits right there in our cities as well. So we are at the brink right now, and it is working people, it is vulnerable communities, it is African Americans and Latinos and youth and elders who are being, just devastated right now, thrown under the bus. And there is a workable future for us. We have absolutely nothing to lose and everything to gain. In the words of Alice Walker, the biggest way people give up power is by not knowing we have it to start with. We have the power. This is all about refusing the propaganda that tells us we are powerless. We are not powerless, we are powerful. And it's all about flicking the switch in your own brain so that we can stand up and begin to have a government that actually serves us, we the people. We have the numbers, we have the solution. What we need now is the courage of our convictions. Go to jillstein2024.com and you can be part of that team to transform our future right now while we still have a fighting chance.
Dr. Jill Stein, presidential candidate for the Green Party. Thank you very much. 9-second applause.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.